But somehow, folks who consider themselves progressive Democrats have seen fit to throw $3 billion at the richest man in the world. That is wrong, and we should all be outraged at what has happened here.
That was City Council member Jimmy Van Bramer leading a rally yesterday protesting the deal to bring Amazon's new headquarters to Long Island City, Queens. Good evening and welcome to Metro Focus. I'm Rafael P. Roman. The blowback has been swift. Van Bramer is just one of several elected officials now vowing to fight Amazon's HQ2, saying the deal announced this week gives too much away to the tech giant. State Senator Mike Gianaris, who represents Long Island City at the state level, calls the plan, which would give Amazon over $1.5 billion in tax incentives, quote, corporate welfare. City Council Speaker Corey Johnson blasted the deal-making process, which he says was done, quote, behind closed doors with zero community input. And newly elected Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came out strongly against the plan, saying that her office has already started fielding calls from outraged residents. But with Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio united in support of HQ2, can anything really be done to stop it? Joining us now to talk about all that as part of our Chasing the Dream initiative is Ben Max, Executive Director of the Gotham Gazette. Ben, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
You know, Ben, last year I went to an event at Google's headquarters just after it was announced that Amazon was looking for a new place to place a second headquarters. And even though it wasn't the subject of the event, all that people talked about was how excited they were that Amazon might come to New York City. And among the most excited were some of the people, I think, that are now most strongly against it. What changed? What are the chief grievances that people have against this deal?
So I think the top two, but the one that really probably gets at yours, the top two are the process being so secretive and not including local legislators like Gianaris, Van Bramer, Ocasio-Cortez, and others, and then the money that's at play, the tax incentives, the tax breaks, and the capital grant that's being offered. But the one that really speaks to probably your question is the process involved and the questions around the secrecy of putting this deal together without any real public review or the legislators involved.
But you know, this process has been going on for over a year, so obviously the City Council knew that they weren't being asked to contribute. They knew they were being kept out.
Right.
So why did they wait till after the deal was struck to complain about that?
It's an important question. I think one of the things is that the secrecy of the deal and everything else that's always going on, including the elections we just had, probably lulled some people to sleep a little bit. Mm-hmm. The other thing at play is I don't know that people had quite gotten up to speed about what the timing of the announcement would be to sort of get out ahead and start banging the drum a little bit. But I think your point is very valid, and it's a question that needs to be asked of the people opposing this. Where were your voices as this process was unfolding? You should have been demanding more information.
You know, as far as the money is concerned, 1.5 billion, over 1.5, something like 1.7 just from the state. You know, I don't know much about these deals, but even I knew that there was going to be millions or perhaps even billions involved in giveaways to get Amazon here. How come the people who are complaining about it didn't know that?
I think they had a sense. So here's one of the most important lessons from what's going on here. So we should also say that this is not completely final yet. There's a memorandum of understanding. They've made an announcement. There's a process that needs to happen. There's paperwork that needs to be filed. There's not a lot of approval that has to happen from these legislative bodies, and that's part of the criticism, right? But there's still steps before this is a completely done deal and there's shovels in the ground, so to speak. But one of the things that this process helps us understand is that these tax breaks and these tax incentives were all there. They're existing programs. So these are things that Amazon was taking advantage of and that the city and state could offer, all except one capital grant that the state is providing for about $500 million.
And how are Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio responding to the criticism?
Well, the first thing they're doing is they're pointing to the job number, 25,000 jobs expected to be added in New York City over 10 years. And the average salary that they're estimating is $150,000 a year. So they're pointing to those two numbers. They're also talking about diversifying the city economy, building out Queens as this tech hub, and encouraging more economic growth in the outer boroughs. Now, there are issues with all of those things, and we could get into them. One thing I'll point out now, though, is that when you talk about an average salary of $150,000, that could be lifted quite a bit by some very highly paid top executives,
Right.
and you're making the average look a lot better. However, we know there will be a number of good paying, sort of middle level jobs coming. But then that also leads to the question of who's filling them.
And by the way, Crystal City's getting 25,000 possible jobs, potential jobs, and we're getting 25,000. But Virginia is only giving a third of the incentives, $500 million instead of $1.5 billion. Has the governor addressed that?
He has a little bit. One of the things he's pointed to is that the tax structures in the two states are very different, and in order to lure Amazon, the tax structures already in place, the benefits in place, are because of New York's high tax atmosphere. And that's part of the reason, again, that some of these programs already exist. As I was saying, what they're doing is they're using programs at the city and state level that already are in place and probably need some reevaluation and might get some as a result of this.
Do you think that the governor and the mayor are surprised at the level, the degree of blowback that they're getting on this?
Probably a little. I think they both have come to expect it at this point, and they sort of laughed about it a little bit when they were holding a press conference together. But I do think that their assumption would be that the number of jobs and a lot of good paying jobs coming in would be more appreciated probably than the blowback has indicated. The other thing that's at play here is, and they were touting this at that press conference, is at least in the construction and the building services jobs, there will be a lot of union jobs involved. However, the rubber meets the road around the actual Amazon employees, and there's serious questions about how Amazon treats efforts to unionize among its employees.
One of the most prominent arguments that have been made is that, look, it didn't take the smartest company in the world 14 months to figure out that they probably wanted their headquarters in or near the political and the financial capitals of the country, and that we just paid $1.5 billion plus for something that was going to happen anyway. Do you buy that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that that's a very serious question at play here as well. One of the things, as I've indicated, is the city and the state haven't, if they were going to bring Amazon in, there's very little that they could control about the tax breaks and incentives that would go because they're taking advantage of existing programs. However, what they could have negotiated was anything you're getting in these tax breaks and incentives, you put back into the community. You do more workforce development, you do more outreach to NYCHA, you put additional funds into infrastructure. We haven't even touched on that really yet. Stress on the MTA, questions around transportation. There's a lot of stuff built in here, not to mention issues related to climate change, Long Island City and these headquarters being right on the river.
So in 15 seconds or so, what's your best guess? Is this deal going to happen? Is Amazon going to be in Long Island City, more or less, according to the deal negotiated already?
I don't like to do too many far out predictions because this could be a long time. But yes, I think so. Probably. The question is, will there be lawsuits, and will these protests, if they continue, will they have an impact on what the final deal looks like?
All right. Okay, Ben. Very interesting stuff. Thanks so much for joining us to talk about it.